everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Hybrid Healing Hour. Today, we are going to be discussing stomach acid and proper digestion with one of our favorite guests, Elizabeth Kuntz, who is a nutritionist. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. So I love working with you because I know you have a lot of passion behind this topic, and you're passionate when you're working with your own patients, and I see that. So why don't you go ahead and tell our audience a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, so I practice functional nutrition, and I got into this field based off of my own health history and journey, dabbling with PCOS, gut issues, and just a lot of symptoms that I was experiencing that there wasn't really like an answer for at the time. So I was in college and I would go to the psychiatrist for anxiety medication. I would go to the gynecologist who gave me birth control for PCOS, whatever that means.
Right.
I, was taking antacids when I would have heartburn and just all of these different pills. The dermatologist was helping me with my acne, and I was taking spironolactone, and nothing really seemed to work. And I started taking nutrition courses in college, and one course, it was called Food is Medicine, and it taught me all about the medicinal properties of our diet and eating. And at the time, I thought that I was eating healthy, like I was eating the normal American diet. And I just learned more about the importance of nutrition, and I started to implement a lot of the changes that I was learning, and everything changed. My health changed, and it caused me to start asking why. Like, why is this going on? What's the root cause of these problems in the first place? So I went back to school and studied functional nutrition, where I learned a lot more about hormone balance and gut health and just the foundations of wellness through stress management, kind of seeing this like holistic picture. And once I learned this and saw the benefits personally, I wanted to share it with the world because I couldn't stop talking about it because it was just so impactful of how much healthier I got and how much better and in control of my health that I felt. So I opened up my practice last year, and I have a lot of clients who come to me because, they just want to feel better. They want to learn how to take better care of their bodies. Oftentimes it could be weight loss related, but a commonality between everyone is, they don't feel good. They don't have good energy. They have fatigue. They struggle with sleep. Maybe they have like bloating as the day goes on, or they have all of these like GI symptoms. And so that kind of steered me in the direction of realizing no matter what somebody's issue is with their health or what symptoms they're presenting me with, always focusing on gut health, even if the symptoms aren't located like regionally in the gut, it's going to help support their health one way or another. And the benefits that I've seen are just amazing.
Exactly. Like, for example, if somebody's having trouble sleeping, you can look at the gut and you can actually make them sleep better when you heal the gut. And we've done a leaky gut podcast on here before, and I recommend people go back and listen to that as well. And I'm sure some of this is going to be redundant, but we're going to dive into it a little different today.
I love hearing stories like yours because I've found through experience that the people who treat a condition best are the ones that have gone through the journey themselves, because they can relate and they understand exactly where you're coming from. So it's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely have a different level of empathy for a lot of my clients, and I really work hard to make them feel heard and understood, because in my journey, even as like a teenager and young in my 20s, I felt so misunderstood by everyone, by my doctors, my family, because these people in white coats were telling me, no, your labs look fine, everything's fine. But I knew something wasn't fine, something was off.
I actually met Elizabeth a few years ago, and I would say she was one of the first people that introduced me to opening my eyes to conditions that traditional doctors don't believe in, like adrenal fatigue. And, she would talk to me about how she felt, and she's like, but it's okay. I know you don't necessarily know how to treat that, but I'm going to figure it out. And she did. And, and after that, I loved learning more about it. I took it a little more serious. And then, now here we are, we've incorporated a lot more functional things like that into our practice. And I really enjoy seeing the changes you can make in people's lives. Yeah. So let's dive right in. I want to know, first of all, can you tell us what the importance of stomach acid is?
Yes.
Or what is stomach acid even?
Yes. So stomach acid is a substance, a gastric juice, we can call it. It lives in our stomach, and it's produced by, they're called parietal cells that line the stomach. And let's just start with this analogy of, let's pretend we're cooking and we're making chicken soup. So we have a pot and we have a whole chicken and we have some veggies and herbs, maybe some like water or broth. But one of the most important things that we need to create these ingredients and turn them into edible soup is going to be heat, right? That water has to boil, or else the chicken, there might be germs on it that we would get sick if we ate raw, and the soup wouldn't taste that good, and the nutrients wouldn't be as bioavailable from some of those vegetables. So our stomach is like that pot, and our stomach acid is like that hot water. That's kind of a catalyst to make all these changes with, how we digest our food. And it can also create this domino process that we'll talk a little bit about for the rest of our digestive tract. So our stomach is supposed to have acid in it. And if this acid, it's just as acidic as like a car battery. It's so acidic. So if it touched our skin, like our fingers, or if it touched other parts of our body, like our esophagus, it would burn really, really badly. Our stomach, the muscles and the lining of our stomach is so thick, it's made to protect us and keep the stomach acid present where it's supposed to be. So thinking of some reasons why stomach acid is important, it's going to help break down our food, right? So digesting protein is happening in our stomach, and that when we start to eat food and it's present, especially protein is present in the stomach, the parietal cells are going to start releasing stomach acid. This change in pH, it's supposed to be below 2, is going to then activate pepsinogen, which is an enzyme that's going to then turn into pepsin to break down our protein. So without that pH low right off the bat, we're going to have a hard time breaking down protein and absorbing protein really well. Other benefits of stomach acid, kind of like I said, that hot water killing the bacteria and germs, in the chicken, for example. With stomach acid, it is one of our first lines of defense against pathogens that can be coming in from our food into our mouth, into our body. So this could be parasites, it could be viruses, bacteria, just, even molds and stuff on our food. And stomach acid is one of our first lines of defense in our immune system to kill that off so it doesn't continue to travel down and create homes and spaces in our body, making us feel sick. Other benefits of stomach acid. So it almost is like this domino effect that's going to take place where once that pH is a certain level, it's going to then tell the pancreas, okay, it's time to start producing pancreatic enzymes. It's going to tell the gallbladder, let's start releasing bile to help emulsify and break down fat. So you can imagine when that pH isn't where we want it to be and our stomach is more alkaline and less acidic, the rest of the digestive process isn't going to fall into place the way that we want it to, and people will start to struggle with some more, GI symptoms. We need it to activate, it's called intrinsic factor, which is going to then absorb vitamin B12. Right. So we can also see people with low vitamin B levels on their labs, or anemia, low iron. That could also be an indication that they have low stomach acid. And then lastly, that pH is also going to tell these like valves that we have. So if our stomach sits in the middle, we have a sphincter, like a door that's going to shut off from the esophagus. So we want that to be closed when there's food in the stomach, because we don't want the food to start to travel back up through the esophagus. Right. And then also the valve from our stomach to our intestines when our stomach is done doing its job. So without that proper pH, oftentimes those valves are going to be kind of like looser, like they're opening when they're not supposed to, and then food is going to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it can present as these symptoms of like stomach, like indigestion or heartburn, GERD. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Wow. I mean, yes, I've always known stomach acid is very important, but, one of the things I can't wait to get into is figuring out then why are we putting people on stomach acid suppressants, right? Like PPIs, proton pump inhibitors, H2, which is for people out there, omeprazole, pantoprazole, lansomeprazole, like all those, right? And then like H2 blockers like Pepcid or Zantac, and then you have your other over-the-counter antacids like Tums and Rolaids, right? Like here we are wanting to suppress all of this acid. It sounds like we really need it. So why do people think of acid as being so bad, the bad guy?
Yeah, it's a great question. So symptoms of low stomach acid, so hypochlorhydria, and high hyperchlorhydria, high stomach acid, are the same. So it'll feel like heartburn, the GERD. It could feel like you just, after eating, you have this heavy sensation in your stomach. You might notice bloating, gas. You could have undigested food particles in your stool.
Maybe belching.
Yep, that's another symptom. And so all of these, they're the same for high and low stomach acid. A lot of doctors, and you can share like what you guys do too in your practice. We are
guilty.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just as guilty as other ones out there. And that's why we want to have you on.
But most people aren't getting their stomach acid levels tested.
Right.
So they go to the doctor with these symptoms that are the same, exactly the same as high and low stomach acid symptoms. And so the doctor just gives them this medication to reduce or kind of like mask those symptoms that they're experiencing. So they could feel better, but the root of what's actually happening is not getting fixed, and it can lead to this long-term systemic health consequences down the road. And so really the only populations that have high stomach acid, and this is a generalization, of course they're outliers, but infants and people with different like esophageal tumors and cancers. But for the most part, the majority of the population, they actually have low stomach acid. And as we age, just like a lot of other things, like our hormones start to decline, our stomach acid declines as we age. And it's just interesting because so many of my older clients are taking these antacids or medications for high stomach acid, but really I think they have low stomach acid going on. So
you said something earlier about the absorption of vitamins, and we did a podcast on low iron and low ferritin, and it's amazing how many people have low iron and ferritin, and I bet that's probably one of the major factors involved in it.
Definitely absorption issues.
Yes.
They always say you are what you eat, but really you are what you absorb.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then, going back to being able to test people for stomach acid, unless you have another solution out there, it's actually really hard. I tried finding a physician out there. You have to go through a surgeon because it's actually, you have to go under sedation, be put asleep because they have to put a tube down your throat to be able to get to the stomach. And I think, is it called manometry? I think.
Well, that's for pressure, but I think there's, there are strips, pH strips that they put down.
Yeah,
that
down
measure.
and there was
acid
like
at
I
different
had
levels.
to find one in the area that could do it, and there's a lot of I guess regulations with that, or what the patient has to do before the testing, even So it's really not even easy, and it's like you said, it's not practical, and it's never done.
Exactly.
So here we are guessing, and that's how is traditional medicine tends to be, well, the easiest thing is just to write a prescription and send it to your pharmacy, right? So insurance will cover it.
Exactly.
So,
and a lot of patients are wanting that. Like they come to go to their doctor, and when they get medication, they're like, okay, this will help. This is easy. It's just something I have to take. There's no other changes that I have to make right now.
I typically like to educate a lot. If somebody comes to me with these symptoms, I try to educate about, look, it could be high or low acid. We don't know. But what we can do first is we can try a 2-week trial of a proton pump inhibitor. Now, I have had success where some people, they do the 2 weeks and it's gone. And then they're off and they're done. And yay, thank goodness. Now, typically these prescriptions, maybe you have to take it up to 12 weeks, but so many people never get weaned off of them.
Exactly.
And they come to us and they want to stay on it because it's working, right? But I don't like the long-term risks out there, which are very controversial. We've sat in many grand rounds where they say, oh, this doesn't really happen. But then at the same time, you have this other side that says, no, we have proof it can cause osteoporosis, malabsorption issues,
gut dysbiosis.
Gut dysbiosis.
Definitely.
And it's, think about anything. It's changing the microbiome of your gut bacteria and the housing, right?
Definitely. going back into some like of the consequences, that's another thing I see a lot. People will then, they'll be on the medication for a while, they feel fine, and then they come to me because they have more gut issues and they've gone to the doctor and they're told everything seems fine, but they might have SIBO. Right now, bacteria is growing in their small intestine that's supposed to be living in their colon because the environment isn't acidic enough to kill them or not let them live there. I agree. The testing is not practical. And in my scope and my wheelhouse, I do some functional labs. So like the GI map is an example of one test, a stool test that I run. And so through that, I can kind of make educated assumptions or conclusions. If I see that on a GI map, someone has low elastase 1 markers, high steatocrit, so there's low pancreatic enzyme output and high fat matter in their stool, so they're not digesting fat really well. If I see that they have parasites coming up, I mean, we all have parasites, but if they're coming up on a lab, there's a lot in there.
Right.
If I see that there's a lot of dysbiosis, a lot of the bad bugs living in their gut, or candida, that's going to just kind of nudge me in the direction of, we need to also support their stomach acid because digestion is this north to south process. And so something more north, our stomach, if it's not producing the right acid, there's all these consequences, down south as well.
Right. And I think a lot of it, people don't realize digestion actually starts in your mouth, right? We've got a microbiome, gut bacteria in our mouth, and then it starts with chewing, right? So when people are inhaling their food and they're not even chewing, they're not really getting things going, 100%. So it's so important to slow down and chew your food. Why don't you kind of talk about that part?
Definitely. And I would even take it a step further and say digestion starts in the brain. So first of all, we have to be parasympathetic in order to digest our food. So we've heard of like rest and digest and fight or flight. Mm-hmm. So that's the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. And most of us are very sympathetic during the day. We are stressed, we're multitasking, we're working, we're running around. And
we're eating lunch while working.
While driving, while you're on the go.
Yes, exactly.
Even if you're just like watching TV and something like scary or upsetting or emotional is on TV, our brain is not paying attention to eating and digesting and telling the rest of the body what to do. So I always start with our nervous system and trying to focus on educating clients around mindful eating, and chewing our food is totally a part of that, right? Like we want to chew. I remember when I was in school, we had like a little assignment, and the teacher told us to take a bite of an apple and to chew it like 30 times. And after like 8 or 9 times, I was ready to swallow this bite of apple. It's crazy how quickly we chew our food. Something I encourage clients to do, especially this time of year with Thanksgiving that we just had, and Christmas and holidays coming up, I always say don't forward fork. So what that means is don't put food on your fork while there's food in your mouth. Put your fork down. Put your hands down, just like chew, relax, try to slow down that process. So digestion definitely is going to have to start, like I said, in the north, and then the rest of the way is going to kind of follow like this domino effect.
Absolutely. That's a trick I actually recommend for people who tend to overeat.
Yes.
Because I've heard that it takes 15 minutes for your stomach to tell your brain you're full.
Yeah.
So if you're scarfing down your food in a matter of 15 minutes, you're like, I'm still hungry. Well, just pump the brakes.
Exactly. Because then they're on their second plate and they're like, oh, it sounds like,
right. Then they're miserable.
Like, exactly.
Right? Exactly. Wow. So what can we do to get people off these type of medications?
Yeah. So it's definitely not like a one size fit all approach. And definitely work with a doctor or a practitioner who knows what they're doing. I've had a few people working with me go to their doctor and their doctor says, it's fine, just stay on it. And so that can be a little difficult. But it's really, it's different for everyone. But ideally, what we would start to do is first we want to kind of look at the whole gut and the whole system and rebalance it. In functional medicine, we call it the 5R protocol. So that's something that I like to look into and use. But, first starting with like nervous system. So I always ask people like, tell me about the environment, what it's like when you're eating and how do you feel when you're eating, and just helping people become more mind body aware. Are your shoulders clenched? Is your jaw tight? Take a few deep breaths. Maybe we practice 4-7-8 breathing, which is a breathing exercise to just kind of activate that vagus nerve, which is going to help your nervous system
Can you explain the 4-7-8?
Yes. So what we do is we just take like a clearing breath just to, clear. And then we're going to inhale through the nose for 4, hold it at the top of the inhale for 7, and blow out of our mouth like we're blowing out of a straw for 8. And do that for a couple of times, and we can practice if you want.
Sure. Let's do it.
So just see how you feel after. So just first take a deep breath and just notice how you feel. Now inhale through the nose, 4. Hold it at the top for 7. And slowly exhale throughout the mouth for 8.
I need to do that like 5 times
That's
a day.
very calming.
Yes, it is.
It's very calming. And so what that's doing is it's activating our vagus nerve, which is this nerve that connects our brain and our gut. And it's basically telling the body, like, I'm chill, I'm safe, everything's cool, let's relax. We're going to eat right now. We don't have to be stressed.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, then what? So we work on the breathing. We work on getting in the parasympathetic system, in the mindset, right?
Yes. Then we're going to start to focus on, the actual foods themselves. So oftentimes when we're eating a lot of processed foods, refined carbohydrates, added sugars, inflammatory foods, that's going to cause inflammation and can be really hard to digest. So we also want to give our digestive system a break and try to really lean into a whole food diet. So fruits, vegetables, more whole grains, nuts, seeds, high quality animal protein, those foods that are just kind of made in nature that our body knows what to do with. Oftentimes even doing some like food sensitivity or allergy testing can be helpful, just because, like, for example, I'm allergic to eggs. Eggs are good for you, right? Mm-hmm. But for me, my body has a reaction to them. So also being able to understand, I see a lot of times people eating foods that are healthy, but their body is treating it as if it's an invader. And
Exactly.
Exactly.
We definitely talk about that in our practice, yeah.
So, kind of looking at their diet and, if they're having symptoms at the same time, really making sure that they're also removing, spicy foods and hot, like peppers and stuff like that, tomatoes, acidic foods, chocolate, coffee, sugar, a lot of dairy, especially conventional dairy. So we want to just kind of remove these from their diet for a little bit, just to give them a break. And oftentimes that in itself, a week goes by and I get messages like, I feel so much better. I haven't eaten these foods all week.
I know people actually don't realize certain foods are known to actually keep that lower esophageal sphincter that we talked about, that valve that's at between the esophagus and the stomach. Like, I'm pretty sure I read coffee alone. It's not necessarily the acidity of the coffee, but the coffee itself can cause that sphincter to not close all the way.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so that's why I'm like, okay, so even if you're doing, decaffeinated but I typically tend to buy a low acid coffee anyway.
That's so interesting. And I wonder, I talk a lot about not drinking coffee on an empty stomach, just for even like blood sugar reasons, which can be a podcast in itself.
Yeah.
But that's just interesting I didn't know that. And so just to understand, I wonder what having coffee like an hour after breakfast would do compared to with your breakfast or before your breakfast.
Interesting.
So
after we work on the diet.
So then we work on the diet. And then after that, so if someone's taking medication every single day, we have to play around with it a little bit. So maybe they start and do it every other day and see how they feel. And it's going to be a titration method. So ideally we want to titrate them down off the medication while we're titrating up the regular production of stomach acid, but just at the right time. So some people do great with that. And then on the off days, I might have them either supplement with betaine HCl, which is like stomach acid in a pill, plus pepsin, just to help with protein breakdown. And I'll talk about that too in a second. Or we might do digestive bitters or some apple cider vinegar in water, just to kind of stimulate that gastric and digestive, juice concoction that's going on, and to make the environment a little bit more acidic.
Now, would you recommend doing this? Like, a lot of times people take the, omeprazole, pantoprazole, like 30 minutes before their first meal, or they'll do it first thing in the morning, or they do it before bed if they tend to have the symptoms when they lay down at night, right? So is this something you would recommend first thing in the morning, or is it kind of you would do it at the exact same time you would typically do the antacid?
Yeah, that's a great question. So ideally, if you're doing like the bitters or the apple cider vinegar, some lemon in water, that could be maybe 15, 20 minutes before eating. Taking the pill of the pepsin and HCl would be after a couple of bites of eating protein.
Okay.
So you would take that, like, let's say 3 times a day with your meals.
Right.
So if you're taking the medication every other day, then on the off days, we want to start using the HCl supplementation. And it's a titration. So you start with 1 for maybe 3 or 4 days because it kind of builds in our system. And then we'll go to 2 for a few days. And you kind of keep working your way up, and your body is going to let us know when to stop because you'll feel this like warming sensation. So that means that the previous dose was the dose that you need. And as we keep working together, as you keep on, healing your gut, you're going to get to a point where then, maybe 2 tablets, that was your good dose, starts to become too high. So your body's going to wean you off of it as well. It's temporary. But I've had people where 1 is too much and they get this sensation. So we have to work down to maybe a half or a quarter of the capsule or the tablet. But at the same time, a lot of people who are on these medications have a lot of irritation in their upper GI, whether it's because they had acid reflux, but also people have silent reflux where they don't feel it, but there's still this irritation because, like I said earlier, that acid is supposed to live in our stomach. So when it's in our esophagus, it's going to start breaking down that mucosal lining of the esophagus, causing this uncomfortable feeling. So oftentimes simultaneously, or even before we start this, we have to do some upper GI healing. So this would be looking into, sometimes I'll suggest certain like herbal blends that have like aloe vera and slippery elm bark and licorice and like marshmallow root, these very like soothing herbs that kind of just help like heal and seal that gut lining and that esophagus. And then from a food standpoint, we're going to be adding in more bone broth and warm cooked foods, apples and pears, they have pectin, and that's going to help support that gut lining. Maybe some like chia seeds, turmeric, right? Some of these anti-inflammatory, really healing foods that can help replace that lining. So then the integrity of your esophagus and of your gut is starting to feel better too.
That's great. Wow. I love all the detail.
Yeah.
So why don't we go ahead and talk a little bit about vinegar? You've mentioned the apple cider vinegar. So Doc, you want to tell us a little history on vinegar?
Sure. So vinegar comes from the French phrase vinaigre, which means sour wine, which essentially is what it is. And it's a fermentation that occurs with yeast and sugars. And then I don't know how you feel about, a lot of people talk about the mother, right? So the mother is the actual yeast and all the stuff that actually does the work to make the vinegar, and it's what you see, the cloudy, wispy stuff that floats around in vinegar.
The mother is kind of like, this is a fermented, like live food, and so the mother, if we think of like, it's like the probiotic, it's the good bacteria that we want to have in the vinegar. So if the vinegar doesn't have the mother in it, it's not as like potent, it's not really doing...
It's not as beneficial.
Like we're not getting those good bugs.
So do you see the mother when you buy apple cider vinegar? Does it say contains mother, or
it'll say with mother?
Okay.
Or with the mother, and then at the bottom it just kind of looks like, I don't know, kind of like stringy floaters. That's a good one. Floaters.
Okay. So something I would probably like say, ooh, let me throw that out. That looks bad.
Yeah. And you don't really like drink it.
Okay.
Like
but it keeps the stability of in the good stuff in the apple cider vinegar of the part that you do drink.
Exactly. And these are it's fermented. So it keeps, it's like keeping the good bugs alive that are then going to also transfer into your microbiome as well.
Perfect.
So then we talked about the pH levels. So the pH of the stomach typically is between 1.5 and 3.5. And when we talk about pH, the pH scale is 0 to 14. And 7 is the pH of water. And so like you said before, the stomach is very acidic. It's
like a battery.
Acid. Definitely. And that pH is changing. So when there's not food present in your stomach, it might be closer to like the 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5. But when food is present, we want it to go down closer to like the 1 or 0.8. And so it's, just that level of acidity makes such a difference in our ability to digest. So you can imagine if we're kind of squashing that process and getting rid of the stomach acid, then the body doesn't really, like the whole process is kind of messed up, and because the body relies on that pH to kind of follow those next steps in digestion.
I want to interrupt just briefly. Didn't you say there's a few examples of people, you said, elderly population tends to have less acidic pH in there. So I'm assuming they're probably closer to above a 4 or something like that, right? And so they're not digesting as well. But I think I also heard vegans tend to as well. Is there anybody else that has low? We talked about people who had high pHs, you said babies, but what about low pH typically?
Yeah, so that would be, as we age, like we just said, vegans or vegetarians, just because we do need protein present to really help stimulate the secretion of HCl. So even just people who aren't vegan or vegetarian, but just eat a low protein diet, which is a lot of people, they might have low stomach acid. People who are just eating more of the standard American diet, more processed foods. If we drink a lot of alcohol, that's something that messes with the pH of our stomach. And then I would say just like stress, people who are really stressed out, who don't even know that they're stressed, but their bodies are just running off of stress every day. I would say that is also going to be someone who doesn't have, isn't making enough stomach acid.
That makes sense. You can actually get stress ulcers,
Definitely.
And so I guess I've always contributed that to having like too much acid when you're stressed, but it actually is probably from not enough acid to digest and having irritation of the food just sitting in your stomach for too long, because we know that the acid helps stimulate digestion.
Definitely.
And if you have slow digestion, it's sitting there.
And when the food sits there, we can kind of create these like gas bubbles that'll then also rise up, and they've been in some acid. So that's also why we get that feeling of like, whether it's like the belching or just kind of feeling that sensation of the discomfort rising up
in your chest.
Yeah. Another thing that I see a lot in the GI map is people with H. pylori. So H. pylori is a bacteria that a lot of us have and live with, but there can be different virulence factors, and it can turn into stomach ulcers or cancer. And what H. pylori does is it's going to start to damage those parietal cells in the stomach that are responsible for making stomach acid. So that's just another indicator that I forgot to mention earlier that I'll see a lot. If someone shows H. pylori present on their lab, that usually tells me that their stomach acid isn't doing its job to allow the H. pylori to live there.
Wow.
And this is a topic for another podcast, but there's so many people now who are on GLP-1 medications like Ozempic and Mounjaro, which slows down gastric emptying.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're just adding to the problem that's already there.
Yeah. I have a few clients who are on those medications, and I've done a lot of work and research into figuring out how to support them while they're taking the medications, because they're working and it's helping, but also making sure they're not becoming like deficient in nutrients. And that's something that I think maybe more time will tell us, just kind of seeing how this is. I'd love to see studies on like what percentage of these people are going to now get SIBO or yeast or candida overgrowth, and just even like gallbladder health, all of these other motility issues, constipation.
Absolutely.
I think it's really important to consider, and just, weight loss is super important too, and important for our health, but making sure we're supporting our gut, just because it's it's almost like the king of the kingdom, right? Like it influences every other system in our body.
Right. Yeah. Well, and if you're not eating, you have slow digestion too, right? Yeah. So a lot of them stop eating, or what they choose to eat is like very, very, very small meals, because it's suppressing their appetite. And you might be losing weight, but now you're messing up other things. So I definitely recommend to be under physician guided surveillance when you're on these medications.
Yeah.
But I'm interested now about the carbonated beverages and how that, you mentioned alcohol can affect pH. What about carbonated beverages like sodas and diet sodas out there?
Yeah, well, sodas and diet sodas just in general aren't going to be good for our health, just because of even the chemicals in them. But even like seltzer water, right? There's not a lot of chemicals. It could just be like water and maybe some natural flavor. But the carbonation is definitely also going to affect the pH, make it a little bit more alkaline. I usually encourage people to not drink with meals, even in general, like regular water, not trying to drink a lot with meals, and try to sip on water throughout the day. But, sometimes people will even have to transition from soda or diet soda, and seltzer water can be a great transition for them. And so I always just also try to get them to listen to their body, right? Do you feel really bloated after drinking seltzer water?
I was gonna say, is this why people can belch after drinking it, right? It's okay.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, because I looked this up before we did this podcast, but the most carbonated drinks have a pH between 2.5 and 3.5.
Okay.
So they're a little off from what the stomach acid is. And there's some people, I have several patients where that's all they drink. They don't drink water at all.
Yeah. And water is proper hydration is so underrated for a lot of reasons. But when it comes to digestion, our saliva is majority water. Our saliva is going to carry a lot of enzymes to start this process of digestion, and it's going to keep going south. So, that's something else. People who don't drink water during the day and aren't hydrated, they're not going to be able to produce enough of these enzymes and gastric juices to then break down our food properly. So they also will feel, bloated and tired and this like heavy sensation in their stomachs.
Exactly. Amylase and lipase are the ones that we can check like in labs, regular labs, and they're from the pancreas, but they're also in your mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the saliva, like you said.
Yeah.
So I have a question I've gotten asked this before, and does apple cider vinegar, can it actually like harm your teeth or having, anything acidic to drink like that? Or, are you just swishing it down? Like, what's a proper serving?
Yeah. So I'm definitely not a dentist,
right.
but, I always suggest diluting it. So I remember when apple cider vinegar became just this like new hot thing that everyone was doing, they were just taking like shots of it in the morning. And that is very irritating. It tastes awful.
I was gonna say it's gross.
So
yes.
You're going to like gag and not feel good. But that can be, especially if your esophagus and GI tract is kind of like raw and irritated and inflamed, that's not going to feel good at all. So always start with maybe like 1 tablespoon. You can always work up to 2 tablespoons and just put it in like room temp water and drink that diluted maybe, 15 to 20 minutes before eating.
Maybe use a straw.
Using a straw can be really helpful. Yeah, I would say use a straw and not like, keep it in your mouth or like swish it around your mouth. But you also have to think like, cook with vinegars, we eat vinegars, so I'm not a dentist, like I said,
right.
I don't know, but I think it's something that isn't like too harmful as long as you're not just like shooting it back.
Straight. If you dilute it like
exactly. And that just made me think of something else. Even incorporating foods in our diet that are bitter, because the flavor profile of bitter is going to stimulate, the gallbladder and all these other organs, accessory organs in our digestion to produce these enzymes and things that we need. So it could also be, having some like arugula salad to start your meal, or just kind of adding more bitter foods slowly into your diet. That's also a natural way to really support the digestive process and that stomach acid level.
I wish more restaurants offered arugula salads. That's a great starter. You're right. And then what about the gummies? What's your opinion of apple cider vinegar gummies? Because I have a lot of patients who like,
it sounds counterintuitive.
It does.
Yeah, I would read the label and the ingredients. I always am educating my clients on ingredients because, out there in the health market, there's always the next best thing coming out, and all of these products, we're so saturated with these healthy products, and marketing does such a good job making us feel like all these things are good for us. But I promise you the first ingredient in the gummy is probably going to be, if not the second, sugar.
Yes. Or maybe high fructose corn syrup.
Exactly. And these are the chemicals that are kind of contributing to the problem in the first place. So I usually don't recommend, even for like multivitamins, I'm just kind of like, okay, let's try to just like swallow a pill or look at our diet, because the gummies, they could taste good, but they're not really giving us a good nutritional value.
I couldn't agree more. Well said. Well, I think this was very informative. I'd love to have you back on. I'm sure we could come up with another
Absolutely.
topic.
Thank you.
And there's so many. I'm sure, honestly, we could talk about apple cider vinegar in its own topic. There's many benefits of it. We know it can lower blood sugars and etc. Right? But today we wanted to focus on just digestion and the stomach acid. So thank you so much. Can you tell our audience how they can find you? And I would love them to read the blog that you wrote about stomach acid.
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Elizabeth Kuntz, and I have an Instagram. It's eliz.eats, so ELIZ, eats.
Is that EATS?
Yeah, like Elizabeth Eats.
Okay.
I have a website. It's elizabethashleywellness.com. And my email is elizabethashleywellness@gmail.com.
Okay.
Like, what's my email? So those are some ways that you can get into touch with me.
Great. I will also post all that in the show notes. So thank you so much for coming on.
The information contained in this podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended for the purposes of diagnosing, curing, treating, or preventing any disease. This podcast is provided on the understanding that it does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. Before using any products or services referenced on this podcast, consult with your healthcare provider, carefully read all labels, and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the products. Information found or received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem or should you have any healthcare questions, please promptly call or see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Dr. Brian Marias, Deanna Weilbacher, and Hybrid Medical Solution, do not claim responsibility for any adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for any statements made by the guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referenced.
If you would like to submit any questions or if you have any topics you would be interested in hearing about on future episodes, please contact us through our website, www.hybridmedicalsolution.com. That is solution with no S at the end. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, all under Hybrid Medical Solution.